I have clients go to college, come home, and their parents treat them like they're still in high school.
I would love to perfectly curate everybody's opinion of me, but we can't.
It's not time for you to reason with your child when they're up here. Yeah. You need to de-escalate first.
I think what can contribute to anxiety is when parents are unpredictable.
What's up, guys? John Mopper here at Blueprint Mental Health. Welcome you to the third episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Today, I have three members of our clinical team here. I've got Carly, I've got Sam, and for the first time ever, we have Taylor. And today's episode is entitled Unfiltered Fear, Exposing the Truth About Anxiety. So anxiety, I would say, is probably the number one thing that I see presenting in the clients that come through our office. Just a quick little intro about anxiety. If you think about it, we have all these different emotions that we experience. And if you think about our body as like a system, these emotions are programmed in here for a reason. And they're all here as like these warning signs for us. And so for me, anxiety is the clearest one in that it is this warning sign that something is not safe here, right? Now, this comes back from when our brain was like this caveman brain, like 10,000 years ago, which wasn't that long ago. And that anxiety was there to allow us to survive, right? There was like all these different threats that we were facing, like woolly mammoths and whatnot, and starvation and shelter. And but fast forward to today, we don't have these existential threats that we had. But now, something's not safe here can mean along the lines of I'm going to be judged, or people aren't going to like me, or something's not going to go the way I would like it to go. So to start the podcast off, in the spirit of kind of how we practice at Blueprint, like here we're not necessarily like the clean, like blank slate of therapists, of these people just sitting back and letting you do all the talking. I think all of us, some more so than others, like to kind of disclose a little bit and talk about a little bit of our own stuff. We're not dumping all of our like deepest, darkest fears and secrets on our clients, but I think that it does make it more of a human experience when we talk about our own experiences with some of the things that folks are struggling with. So to start the podcast off today, I'd like all of us to kind of give a little bit of an intro of what your own personal experience has been like with anxiety. So who would like to go first? Looking around the room here.
I don't mind.
I see Carly ready to go. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely grew up with anxiety my whole life. And as I got older, I kind of realized what it actually is a symptom of my ADHD. And that's a whole other topic we could go into. But Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been helpful in sessions for a lot of my clients who struggle with just generalized anxiety versus anxiety as a symptom of something else. My personal experience has helped me to help clients identify that as well. So it's something that I hopefully have gotten better at controlling. And I mean, I don't know what else.
All right, that's fair enough. Yeah. How about you, Taylor?
I also had anxiety growing up, and I actually went to therapy, and that was when I realized the exact moment my anxiety started. My therapist actually helped me pinpoint the root cause of it. And it was really eye-opening. And it probably took me a while to realize it, for it to come to the surface. But I was like, oh, this is the moment. This is where my anxiety started.
Yeah.
And then just working through that and learning coping skills and, exposing myself to provoking situations that kind of mimic that first experience helped me overcome it. And I obviously still struggle with anxiety, but not nearly as bad as when I was a teenager.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in a way to Carly and Taylor. I also had anxiety growing up, but mine was more symptomatic and somatic. So I had stomach problems, and I was going to different doctors, and they're like, well, we can't figure out anything. And that's when they were like, you should see a therapist. And that's when I found out I had anxiety. Yeah. And I've managed with my anxiety since then. But yeah, having it really helps us be able to best help our clients, I think.
So my experience made me a little bit different, right? I was a kid in the 80s, right? And a teenager in the 90s. And anxiety wasn't a thing that we talked about at all, right? And I went through the majority of my life not even knowing what anxiety really was. But I could look back and when I was in Little League, and I was a really good ball player, right? So like at 13 years old, I always played with like the older kids, like 15, 16-year-old high school kids, you know? I led off, I played shortstop, I pitched and everything. And like fundamentally, I was a good player. But I have this memory of it was like a championship baseball game and was under the lights and was like against a rival team. And I was playing shortstop. And it's the first inning of the game. And the first ball gets hit to me. And the first one goes straight through my legs, right? And I make an error, right? And now looking back at it, I'm looking back and I remember in my head, I'm like, okay, like I messed up. Like, can't let that happen again, you know? And I'm thinking about the last ball that went through my legs. And then the second one gets hit to me and I make another error, right? Now I'm like, it's building inside of me and it's building inside of me. And now like I'm in my head, I'm thinking about it like, okay, I hope they don't hit the next one to me. You know, like please don't hit the next one to me. And I go on to make like 2 more errors that inning. The rival team in the first inning scores like 7 runs, okay? They're like whooping up on us. And I remember being 13 years old and like calling timeout and raising my hand and going to my coach and being like, take me out of the game, take me out. You know, like I don't want to play anymore, just please. And I'm so like thinking about like, you know, letting my team down. And I remember I went down, I sat on the bench, I pulled my hat down over my eyes and I'm sitting there crying, you know? And positive end to that story was like my team wound up coming back. Like I did nothing to contribute to that, right? I like watched my team have this awesome game and come back and wind up winning, you know? But looking back at it, like, wow, I did. I had anxiety as a kid, you know, these worry thoughts about the future and what are people going to think of me? And, you know, I could kind of trace it back and through college and whatnot, you know, and like I partied really, really hard in college. Looking back at that now, I'm thinking, wow, John, you were probably coping with your anxiety, you know, like it was bordering on like, you know, substance abuse at that point, which, you know, being in a fraternity and a college kid can look that way, right? But fast forward to today and it's different. Like I don't have anxiety in like a traditional sense of like worrying about things, you know. I have no problem sleeping at night, man. Like I'm out at like 9-10 o'clock at night and I sleep straight through to the morning, not waking up at all, like no early morning awakening or anything like that. So I don't have any like worry thoughts, but I do have, and this is where I'm like, okay, is this more of a tension thing or is it anxiety? Where when I have downtime in my day and like my day's filled up, man, like I'm like up at 5 a.m. reading for an hour, gym, mixed martial arts, meditation, you know, volunteering as an EMT, all these extracurricular activities that I do. But when downtime comes and there's nothing to do and I have a gap of like 4 or 5 hours with nothing to do, it's this kind of more of an angst, I guess, that I have, like an uneasiness that I just can't just sit and be, right? So anxiety, maybe an attention thing, but today I don't necessarily have like the worries I think that I had when I was younger, you know. That's my personal experience so far. So enough about us and all of our sad stories about Little League, you know. Let's talk about what we're seeing with our clients, right? So everyone here kind of works with different types of clients that come through our doors. So I want to hear from you guys of like how you're seeing anxiety presenting in the different clients that are coming through Blueprint.
Well, I can speak to like go in age order.
Okay.
Or
height order.
Or
maybe.
height or well, I mean, I would be stuck in the middle of that too,
Okay.
I guess. But so I work with our littles population, so that's our 5 and up kids that come in. So I see a lot of separation anxiety as well as like generalized anxiety and then some phobias. Speaking more to like the separation anxiety, that's like a very normal anxiety for younger children to have. Oftentimes it's obviously separation anxiety from a caregiver or a parent because of, again, like the attachment you have formed with that person. So oftentimes it will be like a parent coming in, specifically with the ages of like 5 to 8, where the separation anxiety might be affecting them at school, or it might be affecting them with going to different extracurriculars. But then there's also the piece of like the phobia aspect of like, I'm scared to go upstairs by myself because it's dark, or I'm scared to go downstairs in the basement by myself because it's dark. And also, of course, like the phobias of like thunderstorms oftentimes, or the fear of like someone robbing the house. Those are like very common and like developmentally normal fears and anxiety for children to have.
Sure, being scared of the dark.
Yeah. I mean, we can probably all think of times when we were scared of the dark, or like, I know for me specifically, I had like a long ranch house growing up and I was scared to go to the other end of the house because it was dark, long hallway you would stare at. So like, it makes a lot of sense, like logically thinking that, developmentally, again, the brains of children in those ages, they can't perceive threat the same way that we can, and like logically be able to think that through. So that's like how I often see anxiety with the younger kids.
Yeah, I work with littles as well. I think my whole caseload right now is like 80% 11-year-olds.
Okay.
And I'm seeing a lot of really similar fears. I think the biggest one is someone's going to come in my house at nighttime. They all tend to have that fear.
More so than like the monster under the bed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like so it's like more of like
Real
an
life
actual
people.
real like okay.
Like
Yeah.
this real person is going to come in and harm me and my family. And it's so funny because thinking back when I was that age, I used to sleep with a fake butter knife underneath my pillow because I had similar fears, I realized. And you're scared of it, and like your heart is racing and you really think this thing is going to happen, and you convince yourself someone's coming into this house. So I can kind of agree with that's really the fear that I'm seeing the most and the biggest anxiety.
But so those are, like you said, fairly typical, right?
Yeah.
Like what was maybe for me a monster in the closet or a monster under the bed, or like, going and knocking on my mom and dad's door to be like, hey, can I come sleep with you? Like very normal. And, I at that age would never have ended up in a therapist's office for being afraid of the dark. So when does it become like an issue though, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, because I think a lot of people listening would be like, okay, yeah, but why does that kid need therapy?
I think a big component to this part of like the conversation is how parents respond to it. If you have the support of your parent to help you work through that anxiety, it's a little different than if you have a parent who's like, you're being ridiculous, go back to bed. I think like, having a parent that walks you to the front door and says, look, it's locked, or look, our alarm is on, or I'm going to sit here with 5 minutes until you can calm down. I think that plays a really big part in when it becomes a problem or not.
I often see too that like when parents bring their children here, obviously it's like we're not just working with their child, we're working with the parents too. Oftentimes, actually, a lot of the work is more so done with the parents on like coaching the parents through how to be able to help the child experience their anxiety in a developmentally normal way, or be able to help them cope through it. Because like obviously there's one end of the spectrum which might be like, oh, they're just scared to go to sleep in their bed at night alone. But then there's the other side of the spectrum where it's like, well, they're 15 and still sleeping with their parents in their bed, which is like, you have to kind of figure out, okay, so when does it get to that? And so sometimes parents will come in the middle of like, okay, what's the interventions that you guys can help us with?
Yeah, I think that's a good question to ask, like what's developmentally appropriate, and a lot of parents or just people in general might not really know the answer to that, because also every kid's different, so it's like, what is normal and what does that even mean? And then kind of to your point, Taylor, it's like, how disruptive is that to your everyday life? Is it a big deal that we have to show the kid that the door is locked, right? Or is that really like prolonging the nighttime routine and like causing a lot of like issues at bedtime? So it's just like any other disorder, like mental health symptom. I think it's how negatively is it impacting your life.
Sure. Now with the little guys, they might as well just kind of stick with you two for now. For the little guys, like what about like in relation to school? Right. What are you seeing when it comes to anxiety and school? Because I know like that's a big one for parents. Like,
I think school should be looked at as like an umbrella and then all the things underneath it. So it can be different for kids. Someone might be afraid I'm not going to get the right grade, or my teacher really does not like me and they yell at me all the time, or they're mean to me, or I'm going to have no one to sit with at lunch. This person bullies me. So there's different areas of school that could be contributing to school anxiety.
And oftentimes, like going back to going to sleep at night, you see children's anxiety come out when they're having a hard time going to sleep. The reason they're having a hard time going to sleep is because they're having anxiety or worrisome thoughts while they're trying to fall asleep, which then causes like behavioral upset sometimes at night, where the kid can't have a nighttime routine, or they're coming and waking you up at 2 a.m. And a lot of times it does go back to their anxiety that they may have about the next day.
And they're living in that, the what, right? Anxiety is you're living in the future. You're worried about the what ifs, what could happen, what might happen. And that's just, ruminating in their brain all night.
So I had a client years ago. We're talking like 2016 when I first started the practice. I worked with little guys too, right? I would take whatever I could get, man, because I was poor, right? I was just like, throw them at me. If you were willing to come and like, I'm willing to work with you, I'll figure it out, Probably not the best. I wouldn't do it now, but at the time, like, that was the best that I could do, right? So he was 9 years old, and the parents came to me and they're like, John, he's having like these like meltdowns at bedtime, like he's like blacking out. He's like on the floor, and I think he's like blacking out. Here's a video, right? Because they took a video of what was going on. And I watched the video, right? And like, I'm like, okay, like this kid's not like blacked out, like he's just having a tantrum, right? And with this child, he like just didn't want to go to bed yet, it wasn't a fear-based thing or anything like that, right? So we came up with this like behavioral intervention, okay? And the plan was this. I meet with the parents, and then we bring the kid in. He's 9 years old, cute little kid. And we're like, hey man, like listen, we're gonna come up with a way that you're gonna be able to stay up later on the weekend. Sound good? He's like, yeah. He's like, heck yeah, I want that, I'm like, here's the deal. For every minute or every night that you go to bed on time when you're supposed to, and you stay in bed, you're gonna gain 10 minutes bedtime for your weekend. On Friday, Saturday night, you get an extra 10 minutes. So if you go to bed every day, every night on time, Monday through Thursday, we'll actually round up and you get an extra hour added to your bedtime at night. Sound good? He's like, yeah, man, that sounds awesome. Okay. Now here's the other part of this. Billy, let's call him Billy, right? For every minute that you don't get into bed, you're going to lose 10 minutes of bedtime the next night, right? And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll do that, So now I meet with the parents and I'm like, okay, look, we have to be consistent. Because I asked him, okay, what are you doing when he's throwing these tantrums at bedtime? They're like, well, we're rubbing his back and we're making him a nice cup of warm milk and everything. And I'm like, so, okay, like, I get it. It sounds good, but basically you're like throwing a tantrum equals me getting warm milk and mom rubbing my back, right? So we put this plan into place, and I'm like, all right, you guys have to be consistent with this. So like the first night he loses like an hour, dude. Okay, like he doesn't go to bed and he loses like an hour. So the next night comes and he has to go to bed an hour earlier. That night he loses like another hour worth of bedtime, right? So now the third night comes, okay, and it's like still fucking daylight out now at this point, right? And they have to like put this kid to bed. And like he winds up like losing like just like 10 minutes that night, right? Like he starts to get it. But then by like the second or third week, this kid was like hitting on, his bedtime. He's getting that extra hour every weekend, because of this behavioral intervention that the parents put in. Difference being was it wasn't really anything like he wasn't anxious about going to bed. He wasn't anxious about the dark, that was just kind of a little bit more of a behavioral thing that was going on that was, inadvertently being reinforced, by the parents.
Yeah. If you think about it, something I tell parents is every single behavior is a form of communication.
Sure.
Yeah.
Every single one. So even if the communication is, I'm really pissed that I have to go to bed, the tantrum is the way of telling you that because they don't have the language yet to say, man, I'm really disappointed that I have to go to bed right now.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, that, and then, you go into like the 4 S's, which is, Tina Payne Bryson came up with that, which is like, I'm still the parent, I'm still in charge, and I can help my kids feel seen and soothed and safe and heard, and we're still going to bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand you don't want to go to bed. I totally get that. It's really hard when we're having fun. We still need to go to bed, and I'm going to help you through this tantrum to get you to bed.
I think a lot of parents struggle with that.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of times they think that validating the emotion, soothing the emotion means enabling the behavior. And those are two different things. You know, like you said, you can validate the emotion, you can help them through coping with that emotion and still set the boundary and still enforce the behavior. I think, I mean, obviously it's easier said than done, but I think it's, that's a huge one.
Yeah. It's ideal. Like that's 100%. Even like into my teenage clients that I work with 100%. Like you can be loving, validating, compassionate, and still set consistent limits and boundaries. Like that is the key. Like perfect world, that's how we're executing, right? But we usually then, we're going to talk about this later, but like we get parents usually leaning too far to either extreme, right? And sometimes each parent, mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, whatever it might be, each having their own approach where one is maybe overly validating, overly compassionate, and not setting boundaries, where the other parent is like the hammer and only sets boundaries and doesn't take any of those emotions into account.
Good cop, bad cop.
Yeah, 100%. You know, 100%. What about now older clients? So, Carly, I know you work with some of the younger, but like
I have
teens,
some
young
of the
adults.
younger ones. Yeah, I have like 10 and up, ages 10 and up. So I definitely I'm seeing really similar things in my younger clients. Teenagers, I mean, a lot of it's school because that is your whole life. Like you were saying, Taylor, it's your social life, it's your academic life, it's your source of usually like self-esteem and, you know, like where like self-worth, a lot of that comes up. Sometimes it has nothing to do with school. Sometimes there's family issues or friendship issues that exist outside of school. So a lot of different triggers, but a lot of times with the older kids, they have more ability to avoid. So the avoidance anxiety cycle is something I feel like I talk about multiple times a week with my clients.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So basically, our brains are wired to minimize distress, right? Kind of what you were talking about with like from an evolutionary standpoint, that's how our brains operate. Our brains are really good at minimizing distress, and our brains are really bad at predicting what's actually going to make us happy long term. So what a lot of these teenagers and even young adults and you know adults, everybody, you know, what a lot of people typically struggle with is, okay, I have the trigger for anxiety, I have the anxiety producing thing. What's the best way to minimize the stress around that? Don't deal with it, right? Avoid it. We have so many ways we can avoid it. We can distract ourselves. We can doom scroll on our phones. We can throw ourselves into our academics or our work. So many opportunities to avoid. And it does provide relief, right? We do get that short-term relief. It works for a second.
Which is ultimately a reward.
Which is the reward. Yeah, we get the relief. It works. Our brain then learns, oh, okay, how to deal with anxiety, avoidance. But then inevitably, you have to deal with that anxiety producing thing again. We can't fully avoid all of these stressors most times. So the next time you're presented with that anxiety producing thing, it's now 10 times more anxiety producing than it was in the first place because you never actually addressed it. You never actually let yourself process through that emotion or problem solve or anything. So that's what I like. A classic example of that is like homework or, you know, studying, procrastinating. Let's say I have a big assignment due Friday. That's stressful. How do I minimize the stress? Don't think about it. Don't do it. Now it's Thursday night, 11 p.m. It's due in the morning. Now I've created this huge anxiety stressor, a huge trigger, and it's this 10 times more stressful than it needed to be in the first place. And, you know, that's the only way our brain has learned how to deal with it is avoid and then have this like huge bout of stress and then start the cycle all over again. So a lot of my work with the teenagers and young adults and really most of my clients is breaking that cycle, which sounds simple, right? Oh, just don't avoid, but that feels like so uncomfortable, right? Yeah. That feels like really challenging for a lot of these clients, which I relate to. I think we can all relate to. But yeah, that's typically the work is how do I break that cycle? And a lot of it is increasing self-awareness of like, oh, I'm doing it again, right? Oh, I'm feeling that urge to avoid. I want to avoid this so badly. Resisting that urge is super hard. So a lot of it is like self-soothing through that feeling, allowing yourself to feel that feeling, which isn't fun. So we're not always like motivated to do that, you know, but again, that's what I was saying before with our brains don't like doing that in the moment, but it contributes to our overall like long-term success usually, which our brains are not good at predicting that. So
I mean, 100%. Because like I just take it even a step further. Like let's say school avoidance.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just something that comes up a lot, right? And it's like, okay, I wake up in the morning, or maybe it even starts the night before, right? Of this anxiety about going to school, whatever is driving that. Maybe it's a social thing, you know. Like I had clients in the past that literally are eating lunch in the bathroom by themselves, right? In order because they don't have anywhere else to go. Not a really pleasant experience at school, right? So I wake up, let's say in the morning, and I have these thoughts about what's going to happen that day. Those thoughts then lead to the feeling of anxiety. And so what I do, I try to avoid it. And so I don't go to school. By not going to school, I don't feel anxious, reward associated with that behavior, right? Next day comes, I do that again, reward associated with that behavior over and over and over again. And what happens then is it's almost like training a puppy, right? And I maybe used this example last time of like training Toby, right? Like when he was really little, I would say sit, he would sit, give him a treat, reward, sit, treat, reward. And so now at 9 years old, he just does it, right? But with that kid who has been avoiding school over and over and over again, now as soon as the feeling of anxiety comes up, it's almost like that automatic, the brain takes over and says, oh, I know what to do. What did we do the last 50,000 times? I avoid it, right? And it becomes this really, really tough pattern to break. And I would say just in general, I see that with our clients of like these like patterns that have been really like, are just like deep rooted patterns that are really difficult to break because it means moving towards the consequence, right? Moving towards discomfort, sitting with discomfort, which is the opposite of what our brain is actually programmed to do.
Yeah.
Because going back to that caveman thing, discomfort used to mean like death,
Danger.
right?
Yeah.
Danger, real danger,
Yeah.
you know? So we're trying to override this kind of instinct that we have built into us.
Right. Like I'm not safe.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah. So like on my end, you know, I was just thinking about a particular client. It's a young adult client of mine. She's like 25, 26. And we just had a session. I love her to death. You know, like I love all my clients. They're awesome. And we have really good relationships. But she was talking about how like, hey, I'm just feeling like the monotony of my life is like really wearing me down. You know, I get up, I go to work, my job's fine. You know, like I don't hate it or anything, but I go to work and all I'm doing is looking forward to the weekend, and the weekend comes and I go chill by the pool for the weekend, and then Monday starts over again and I go back into this thing. And so we start talking about like, okay, like why don't we like shake things up a little bit, you know, like let's add some stuff to the equation here. Like what are some hobbies you might be interested in? Just because you didn't do it as a child doesn't mean like you can't start it now, you know, like let's throw some new stuff into the mix so your life isn't as monotonous. It's not always about coping with shit. Like if there's an opportunity to fix the problem or change something, like let's change it, right? We don't have to cope with everything. And so started bringing up these different things. And she said, you know, I really used to like to go to the gym. You know, that was something I used to like to do. So, all right, how about we get back into the gym? But then it started to kind of come out that there were, you know, I feel uncomfortable going to the gym, right? I've gained some weight since the last time I used to go. And now I feel like I'm going to be judged and people are going to notice me. And I also like, I'm kind of like haven't done it in a while. And like, so what was driving this monotony was really on the back end anxiety, because she was anxious about going in and doing this thing because of what people might think, right? Or I have clients that, you know, won't even go up to the Wendy's counter and order their own food, right? And I'll ask them, so like, well, why not? You know, like, why not? Well, what if like I say something stupid, or like I take too long to get my money out of my wallet? I said, well, what if, right? Well, then the person might, you know, like think I'm stupid. Well, okay, so just checking in here, like the reason you're avoiding doing this thing is because of like not an actual consequence, right? But what you think someone else might think about you, right? And then we take it a step even further. I'm like, okay, well, let's go a little bit further. Let's say they don't just think something. Let's say they like, what are you, stupid? You know, like you don't know how to order food, and they actually say something to you, right? That would be uncomfortable, right? But then checking in of like, okay, well, who the hell is this person to me?
Right.
Like, what do I care about the guy at the Wendy's counter? He's not someone like that's my close friend or a family member. Like, does that even have to
Right.
bother you? You know,
You're giving them the value.
right, 100%. You know, like, and being able to start to kind of challenge some of these things. But like, you know, I see it like fear about my young males. You know, asking a girl out. You know, like the idea of being vulnerable. Of like saying I kind of like you, or approaching someone and saying, hey, do you want to get some coffee or something? Because not knowing what they think about you, you know? I mean, there's just a lot of anxiety coming through my office.
I feel
sure.
like technology has kind of enabled that though, right? Because now you like dating and ordering food, right? You can just DoorDash all
You have
your
to talk
food.
to anybody.
Yeah.
You can just open your front door and your food will be there. Or all of the dating apps, you don't have to actually ever possibly even meet this person in person.
Right.
It's the ability to be able to kind of have a screen in between that
Sure.
can kind of
Right.
help soothe your anxiety in that moment.
Yeah, and
Sure.
if I'm rejected, I'm just gonna unswipe, or
Right.
you know, I don't use
Block
dating
them.
apps.
Yeah.
However
Or
it
you don't
works.
even know, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't match, then there's
Right.
no like,
Yeah.
right?
I forgot about this person already.
Well,
Like,
how about
right,
this? Raise your hand if you have clients that have anxiety about making a phone call,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because we're just
Yeah.
we're not programmed to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
everybody, we make a call maybe
Yeah.
some of them once a month, you know,
Yeah.
once every couple of months
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
right?
I can
I've-
actually.
oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
No, go ahead, Carly.
I was gonna say I've had clients like make the phone call in session,
Yeah.
you know, to just kind of almost exposure therapy. Like,
Yeah.
just do it. I'm here for you, you know. And a lot of it is I don't have control, kind of to what you were saying, John. I don't have control over how that person perceives me. And a lot of times with social anxiety or just general anxiety, that's a lot of the work we do is being okay with that. You won't have control over how that person perceives you. You and I could meet the same person and I could be like, oh my God, John, weren't they so cool? And you're like, I can't stand them. You know,
Right.
our perception of people is based on so many other things than like that person's actual value or self-worth. You know what I mean? Like we could just have different lenses that we look at the world through.
Sure.
So there's so many things outside of our control that contribute to how people perceive us. And that's a really uncomfortable feeling. I would love to have control over how people perceive me. I would love to perfectly curate everybody's opinion of me, but we can't.
Yeah.
And honestly, thank God we can, because that's exhausting. But that's something that I feel like I have a lot of conversations about that in sessions, is like just sitting with that discomfort, being okay with that. That's hard. That's hard for people, I
Yeah,
think.
definitely.
Yeah.
You were gonna say
I
something.
was
Tam.
gonna
Yeah.
say, John, you brought up like, you know, being afraid to go order food. That's kind of what my anxiety was growing up, because, you know, I mentioned earlier I was able to pinpoint the exact moment it started for me. I was maybe like 5 or 6 years old, and I was at a store with my mom, and I loved the Powerpuff Girls, like was obsessed. And there was a Bubbles toy on the shelf, and I picked it up to go show my mom because I really wanted it. You know, only child syndrome, I get whatever I want. Just kidding.
Guilty.
Right?
Yeah, guilty.
And this lady comes over and screams at me for picking up this toy. And I'm like 5 or 6, remember? So I'm frozen and I'm crying hysterically. And my mom comes over and like swoops in and like saves me and yells at this lady. I'm like, yeah, go mom. But that's where it started for me. And so that really, like, I was embarrassed. I was scared. I didn't understand what I did wrong. So going forward, I could not go into a store and pick something off of a shelf. I couldn't ask for help. I couldn't order food. I couldn't call anyone, because I was just so deeply like there. It was subconscious for me.
Well, because you're 5, right?
Yeah.
And when you're that young, the experiences that you have weigh so much more because you haven't had as many
Right.
experiences. Like, it's relative to the time you've been on this planet. Like, if you go to a 2-year-old and you're like, hey, in 1 year, you get this toy, that's like half their life, right? And it's because they've only been here that long. So these early moments of our lives when we're really young, those experiences are more impactful than when you're older and you've had more experiences to kind of like wash it out a little bit.
They're more
you know?
magnified.
Right.
Yeah.
And like to my mom's, you know, my mom is great. She stuck up for me. But what she didn't do was calm me down and talk to me and tell me why I wasn't wrong and what I didn't
Right.
do wrong, and, you know,
Right.
kind of soothe me. So she did her best with what she had.
Sure.
But that would have definitely been helpful for me at 5 years old, to have my parent, you know, soothe me and co-regulate with me. But I think so many parents don't know that's even a thing, or how to do that with their child.
And you're really, at that age, you're really learning social norms. So as a 5-year-old, your brain is logging that as,
Don't do
oh,
this ever
I
again.
should be ashamed of this or guilty of this, or this is bad, and don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Because we're really, I mean, even teenagers and adults, you know, are kind of simplistic sometimes in that way where it's like, oh, this is a behavior that's rewarding. This is a behavior that has consequences. Me picking the toy off the shelf, I guess that's bad now. You know, we like
Right.
log that information
Yeah.
and it stays with you. And it seems so silly, like, oh my gosh, this like situation when I was 5 years old, but that's a learned experience
Yeah.
and it sticks with you for a long time if it's
Yeah.
never talked about or addressed.
Right.
Yeah.
And, like looking back as an adult, I'm like, that lady had her own issues. That wasn't
Oh,
about
Right,
me.
100%.
right.
As an adult, that helps. And I'm like, okay, that wasn't about me. That was about her, whatever she was going through. People take things out on children. And so, you know, there was nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
Right, but you're not able to do that at
At
5.
At 5, you
know,
can't,
like,
yeah.
You're, not
When you're an
able to do
adult,
that
you're
at
able to do
5,
it.
right?
Mhm.
And I think that, you know, like offering some like for parents to offer some like explanations to their kids now, like to like you said, like to be able to like have mom kind of pull you aside and be like, hey, look, understand that was really scary, you know, and right. And not in a way that like I know sometimes like it goes a little bit too far that direction that
Yeah.
like, you know, there's all these videos out there of like parents being like, okay, so we're going to explain to you why bedtime is important. And like, there has to be some times where it's just like, yeah, because mom said so, because dad said so, right? But in a situation like that, like, yeah, being able to offer some explanation. And the thing is that the parent has to have that understanding for themselves to be able to offer that explanation. And a lot of parents who like, if you've never had therapy, you know, a lot of people like never think about their own thinking and how
Yeah.
these things work. You know, like I honestly never knew anything about this until I decided to go to school for it. It wasn't like when I was younger, I was like very self-aware and like, you know, checked in on my own thinking and how things were making me feel like, and I grew up in a time where that wasn't a thing, right? Like, we just didn't talk about that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
All right. So lots of anxiety coming through the office. I think we have some good things. And one last thing, you were saying something earlier about like how we kind of view ourselves, and one of the quotes that I use with my clients that is kind of cool is it's I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. Rather, I am who I think you think I am. Okay, so I'll explain. I'm not who I think I am. I think I'm a cool guy, right? I'm not that. I'm not who you think I am. You think I'm a cool guy. I'm not that. But if I think that you think I'm a loser, then that is how I will kind of walk around
take that as
identifying
truth.
that. And that's my truth then that I'm walking around with, right?
So like adopting that almost.
Yeah,
That-
and a lot of people can go that way unless you have that level of self-awareness and confidence that like you're secure, that you could say like, listen, I know I'm a good guy. Like I asked this girl out, she said no. Okay, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It doesn't mean because I'm a loser. Like she's just not into me. Maybe she doesn't like my face. You know, like
Maybe
it's
we're just
okay.
not compatible.
Right.
Yeah.
You know. All right. So look, here's us talking about all the issues that we're seeing coming up with anxiety. But like, what do you see working to help with it?
Well, again, I can start again with like children's stuff.
I love that.
So there recently was the second Inside Out movie that came out, which I'm the #1 fan of. And the new emotion was anxiety. And that has been something that has really helped me help children with anxiety. All of the parents that have come through with their children here, I've recommended, I'm like, okay, you need to take them to see Inside Out too. And most times when they come back after they see the movie, they are like more willing to talk to me about their anxiety. It's now been personified, which is another exercise that I do with clients often, which I'll talk about in a minute. The actual movie itself has like a scene where a girl has an anxiety attack, and it's like a very traumatic type scene for children sometimes to watch. They all have an emotional response to it, which is a good thing because Disney really did a great job of explaining what it's like to have an anxiety attack, but then also how anxiety can suppress your emotions. That's like the whole purpose of the movie is like all the emotions get suppressed in like a mason jar. Speaking to the personification being super helpful for children of their anxiety, I'll have kids come in here and they'll like draw what their anxiety monster might look like, or I'll have them build like a Lego creature that is supposed to be their anxiety. And most of the time I'll have them name their anxiety. So you get some crazy things. Like one specific one that sticks out to me is I have a client that's 9 who named her anxiety butt crack.
Oh, good one.
So we will have full conversations about her butt crack. And obviously that's her anxiety, but like it's really helped her in the way of being able to like, oh, well, like, would you believe something named butt crack telling you that you're a horrible person or that you won't be able to go to school tomorrow? And they usually will have the response of, no, I don't believe butt crack.
Right.
So that's like a really super helpful like intervention that I use specifically with children. Because again, developmentally, it's appropriate for them. So there's like one of my favorite things.
So if I could just jump in for a second, though.
Yeah.
So like, not to take us on a tangent, but I'm maybe going to take us on a tangent here, right? So I hear that, and that sounds awesome to me, right? And I think that can be very helpful. Now, with my approach as a clinician, you know, it's pretty clear to my clients, I take a little bit of a tougher approach probably, you know, like if you're really, really, really sensitive, you know, I might not be the best therapist for you to work with, right? And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But like, okay, so like with bullying, for example.
Yes.
Okay. Bullying is horrible. When it's really happening, it's disgusting. People have taken their lives because of being bullied, right? And what I've witnessed and the feedback that I've heard from a lot of school counselors is that we kind of overcompensated within the schools of talking about bullying, right? And in the fact that a lot of kids who are having now just normal pure conflict that wouldn't really fall under the umbrella of bullying instantly now goes to, oh my God, I'm being bullied, right? And as you think, so shall you be. If I'm telling myself I'm being bullied, that's going to feel a lot different than saying to myself, like, oh, that dude's being a jerk to me, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, I love the idea of like that personification of the anxiety and the movie making it something that kids are able to talk about. But is there any concern then that younger kids will then start to lean too heavy on identifying just normal kind of worries as like anxiety?
I think that goes back to like developmental age. So if you know, I don't know off the top of my head, but if you go and you look from like 9 to 10 or 9 to 11, then 11 to 13, they have different capabilities based on age. So I think that maybe, you know, for a 9-year-old, it's okay to personify it because that's helping them look at it in a way that they can digest it.
Like storytelling.
Yeah.
For the older kids, you might just say, label it as
Right,
anxiety or fear or
Like I have the worry monster shredder in my office. So I had one of my clients make a monster face for this shredder, and then whenever a client comes in, I'm like, okay, do we have anything that we, you know, want to, you know, list out and shred and feed to the worry monster? What worries do we want to feed the monster? They're like, yeah. And then they'll go and grab, you know, they know my office. They'll go grab the paper and they'll grab the pens, like take ownership of the office and, you know, here's my worries, get them out, shred them.
That sounds, working with you guys sounds like so much more fun than working with me. Like, I want to have therapy. With
but imagine telling like a 25-year-old guy, like, put your worry in the shredder.
I have.
Honestly, that does sound fun.
I mean, instead it's like, that's like, you know, for the older ones, it's like, you know, making the worry printer and throwing it off a balcony or something, you know?
A little more aggressive.
Right. What about for you, Carly? What are you seeing as for interventions that help with your older clients?
I mean, usually we start with just getting curious, really, is like the theme of like, what really is this feeling? Why am I feeling it? Is it a response to maybe a past experience that's getting dug up? Is it a response to an underlying fear of rejection, abandonment, judgment, whatever it is? So that's usually where I start with clients. Some clients come in already kind of having that awareness. Some clients are like, why am I having this reaction? So I think just better understanding yourself is a huge piece of the puzzle, because once you kind of know your triggers, know your sensitive points, know your patterns, know what reactions are helpful and not helpful, then it gets to be a little more problem solving. So getting curious is huge. I mean, anxiety, it depends. It depends on what the situation is. Like social anxiety, we do a lot of that, what I was talking about earlier with, really it's radical acceptance, right? Like that idea that I don't have to like it, I don't have to be happy about it, I don't have to agree with the circumstances, but I have to accept that it's out of my control. How other people perceive me is out of my control. How other people treat me is out of my control to a point. So really a lot of that that's usually where we start, is like the radical acceptance piece. Sometimes clients will come in and they're like, I hate coping skills. I don't want to learn any coping skills. And I really have to kind of explore what their definition of that is, right? It's like maybe they've been through therapy before where it's like, count to 10 and they're like, that doesn't work for me. And
Or
I don't
someone
wanna...
handed them a worksheet or
a
something.
worksheet. Yeah, they're like, this is stupid. I don't know. You know what I mean? So that is another thing that comes up a lot, is like we have to kind of unpack, like, well, why do you hate coping skills? Don't you want to cope with your discomfort? You know what I mean? So it's just kind of exploring like what works for you and what doesn't. And a lot of times it's trial and error. Sometimes I'll tell people, try a bunch of coping skills and not all of them are going to feel effective, and that's okay. These are skills. We use the word skill for a reason, right? I sometimes will use the analogy, like, let's say you wanted to get really good at basketball. The first time you go to a basketball practice or play a game, you're probably not going to be that good at it. Or like if you wanted to play an instrument, right? You want to play guitar, you're going to like not know anything. You're going to sound horrible, right? So the more you practice it, the more you build up that skill. Coping skills work in a similar way. The first time you use a coping skill, you might feel like this is so stupid, right? Like this is not solving anything, helping anything. So practice and like consistency is something that, I try to encourage with my clients. But yeah, I think just getting to know yourself, because anxiety can present in so many different ways. Again, right? So anxiety can be a symptom of other things. Anxiety can be the main thing that's going on. So it really just depends on your environment, your triggers, what's even doable as a coping skill. You might be in a class where you're not allowed to remove yourself from the class, go to the bathroom. You know what I mean? You might be like, a lot of my kids love the fidgets and some of their classrooms don't allow that. So it's really just, you have to tailor those coping skills to like the client's specific needs. So a lot of it is like kind of working together on identifying what exactly that is going to look like.
Yeah, I say it all the time, like coping skills are skills just like anything else, that if no one's ever taught them to you, or if you haven't practiced them, you're not going to be any good at it, right? Like if I like spent the hour with you today teaching you how to serve a tennis ball, and by the end of the hour you're getting it over the net and in the box it's supposed to go, and I'm like, all right, cool, I'll see you next week, same place, same time, but you don't practice serving that tennis ball between now and then, come the next practice, you're not going to be any good at it,
Right.
And so like I take more of an approach of like, I like to provide, and similar to Scott in our practice, like we both like to provide like what is considered like psychoeducation, right? As to like how our system works. And, to you guys here, you guys all know this, any clinicians watching right now, it's going to, kind of seem like some novice stuff, but like to the average person, they don't know this. So I pull a lot, as most therapists do, from cognitive behavioral therapy when it comes to treating depression and anxiety, or CBT for short. And what CBT says is that how our system works, and if you can imagine a triangle, we have a thought first, right? We think something. From that, here, pass that over here, actually. See, I usually put my thought,
board.
I put my thought at the bottom, but we'll start at the top, right? We have a thought. From that thought, we then have a certain feeling or emotion. From that feeling or an emotion, we then engage in a behavior. Then it goes back around. That behavior leads me to think something else, which leads me to feel another way. But the thing is that a lot of times the thoughts that we have are not accurate, or CBT would say that they're distorted in some way, right? And that then leads to a feeling that is not actually relative to what's actually going on. So like, for example, that I use for a lot of my clients is like, young guy comes into my office and he's like, John, I'm really, really depressed. Okay, buddy, like what's going on? What are you depressed about? And he'll say something like, everyone at school hates me, right? There's that initial thought. From that feeling of thought of everyone at school hates me, he feels less than, he feels depressed, he feels anxious about going to school, and the behavior that follows is not going to school, because why the hell am I going to go someplace that everyone hates me, right? But if you look at that initial thought, right, everyone at school hates me, it is just not probable, right? Unless that kid is standing on the roof of the school in front of the entire school, tossing puppies off onto the pavement, right? But even then, there'd be some weirdo kid that thinks that's kind of cool, right? So, but then,
Not the right
so
client
this,
for me.
this feeling I'm having, this anxiety that I'm having is based upon this thought I'm telling myself that just isn't accurate, right? So our work then is to catch that thought, catch that feeling. Maybe I notice the feeling first. And okay, what am I thinking about? Everyone at school hates me. Okay, well, is that accurate? Probably not. And maybe that thought of everyone at school hates me turns into a lot of people at school don't like me right now. And I have a couple of friends, right? So it's not about taking that really kind of catastrophized thought and turning it into like rainbows and butterflies, right? Like everyone loves me at school. But what we talk about is like checking in of like accurately describing the situation to yourself. Because that thought of a lot of people at school don't like me isn't great, but the feeling associated with that thought is going to be a lot less severe than everyone at school hates me. So I will take that approach at times if there is some inaccurate kind of distorted thinking. But sometimes, you know, that anxiety is based upon a pattern that's happened where like, you know, I went to school and people really did pick on me every day. And there's a reason it's valid, right, to have that feeling of anxiety based upon the experiences that we've had. But I do pull from CBT a lot. I'll also pull from dialectical behavioral therapy. I was at one time part of a DBT adherent team where we really took that prescriptive form of DBT and did it the right way. And I'll pull like distress tolerance skills from DBT. And so distress tolerance skills in dialectical behavioral therapy are skills that you use when your anxiety or whatever emotion is at like an 8, 9, 10 level, right? So like that would be if I'm on the verge of a panic attack, and I've had some panic attacks in my lifetime, and I could tell you, like, I haven't had them a lot, but the few times that I did, like, they're scary, man. Like that belief that I'm gonna die right now is real, you know? And then you start thinking, am I having a heart attack? And that feeling of that thought of, am I having a heart attack leads to increased anxiety, which makes you feel like even more like you're having a heart attack, right? Like this is what we're just talking about, right? But in those moments, you're not going to be able to like rationalize yourself out of that, right? It's not going to be like, okay, what am I thinking about now? Is there another perspective? Like, no. So in those moments is when we pull to like distress tolerance skills. Like that's when it's okay to like, how do I like shift to a part of my brain that is like more logical, right? How can I lock my brain onto something else? And so like DBT talks about the tip skill where the temperature part of it is like going grabbing a couple of ice cubes out of the freezer and squeezing those ice cubes as tight as you can. Sometimes that's not enough where my clients have to go into the shower and run that cold water. Like we're looking for something that's going to like shock you back to the present moment. Because if you're about to have a panic attack and you're having anxiety, it's because your thoughts are into the future. So what I need to do is do something that's going to bring me back present. And that is unfortunately where a lot of like self-harm comes from then, right? Self-harm and cutting, whatever you want to call it, people do it because it works. That's the problem. It's not a healthy way to cope. But what it's doing is if I'm really feeling depressed or I'm really feeling anxious or I'm on the verge of a panic attack or I'm on the verge of dissociating even, and I cut, what it does is it pulls all of my attention into that moment and I get relief from it.
Right.
But that then turns into a pattern, right? Which can be really hard to break over time. So just that's my 2 cents.
Speaking of like just like when adults have panic attacks, right? Children a lot of times will show that they're having anxiety through maybe a meltdown or a tantrum. And it's the same thing, right? You need to be able to, like, it's not time for you to reason with your child when they're up here. You need to de-escalate first. It's not time to be like, okay, let's really talk about the anxiety you're going to have tomorrow at school while they're throwing things across the room. So it's like super similar. And us being able to like look at how we handle our own anxiety attacks and then like how we would maybe help a child through a tantrum, which is their own version maybe of an anxiety attack, is helpful.
Yeah, children, like it definitely manifests in different ways. People are like, my child is so angry and they're so mean and they're saying all these terrible things to me. And I'm like, your child's anxiety is manifesting as irritability. And, you know, for children, what you want to do similarly, you want to target their senses, right? So you want to put them in the shower. You want to give them a lollipop for taste, right?
Sour candy.
Sour candy, right. You know, you want to put ice on their wrist. Anything that's going to really target their senses. And I know that can come off as, why am I going to give my kid a lollipop when they're having a tantrum? That's like a reward, right? Connection before correction. You need to connect with your child before you can correct them. You need to, if they're here, they're not listening to you. Their brain is activated, you know, their emotional brain is activated. Their logical brain is taking a break. So you really need to connect with them in order to correct them, because they're not going to listen to you.
I say that all the time. Like, I don't know a single person that is good at problem solving or correcting behavior or thinking rationally or logically when they're at a 10 out of 10. I don't know a single child, teen, or adult that's good at that. You know, nobody's good at that. And yeah, that's a hard one for
100%. As emotions go up, rational, reasonable thought goes down. Like that's how people end up like punching holes in walls. Like it's not like someone's like rationally like I'm going to punch this hole in this wall right now. No, it's like my rational thoughts went down and my emotions drove me to put this hole in the wall. And hopefully I didn't catch a beam, because I've also had a lot of young males come in with casts on their hands. You know.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I like that connection before correction, right? You're meeting them where they're at first.
Right, meet them where they're at. And also you have to realize, a lot of parents don't know this, when your child is in that escalated state, they're bringing you to that escalated state. So it's really important for the parent to do the work internally to make sure they're staying here when their kid goes here, because now their kid brought them here, their kid has control over you and your emotions.
And how can you de-escalate your kid if you're escalated?
If you're escalated, right. You're modeling that for them.
So let's just segue now, like, because the next portion was really like, okay, what role are parents playing in this, you know? And I think you really kind of started us off with, you know, number one thing I think parents can do is work on themselves first, right? Like, because the truth is, plenty of parents bring their little guys, teenagers, or even young adults in here, like, he's a mess, fix him. But they got their own shit going on for sure, you know, no judgments, right? But that then plays a role in how they're interacting with their kids. So like when it comes to anxiety specifically, good and bad, what role are parents playing and what can they do better?
I think you said something earlier about a lot of parents kind of go to one or two extremes, where one extreme can be really dismissive and validating, stop being anxious, everybody has anxiety, don't worry about it, you know, like very dismissive. Or they're very coddling and catering to the anxiety, where it's like, okay, then you don't have to go to school, right? Or okay, then we won't do the anxiety producing thing, or I'm just going to keep you in a bubble, right? And it's hard to find that middle ground, because I can understand, you know, you're a parent, that's your baby, you don't want to see them in pain, you don't want to watch that, you know, and having the ability to like remove your kid from the anxiety producing thing. Yeah, of course, right? You don't want your kid to be in pain, you want to protect them. But what a lot of parents struggle to realize, I'm sure you guys see this too with the younger ones, is like that's really not protecting them, you know. You have to let them be in pain and struggle in order for them to learn how to deal with it. And that can be hard to watch for parents. It can be hard to allow that to happen. You know, so I think if you're on that side of that spectrum, it's like, just letting it be okay when they're anxious, which obviously is really hard. And that doesn't mean ignoring them. That doesn't mean dismissing them and validating them, telling them they can't be anxious. That just means helping them work through it instead of like fixing it for them, right? So, you were talking about this earlier.
Can I piggyback off of that a second? And because, you know, what you're telling me there is like almost by fixing it for them, big picture is not helping their kid, right? It's helping the kid kind of in the moment not feel that way, but is then setting them up in the future to not be able to cope and regulate on their own. But what it is doing is it's meeting the parent's need, right? That I feel better, that I helped my kid in this moment feel better, right? And so a lot of times, you know, parents' own emotions are playing a role in this. And I apologize if I told this story last time. I don't think I did, but I had a client, and I reference this story a lot because it's so common. It was like summer before he was going off to college, okay? And his parents would not allow him to sleep out at a friend's house. He was not allowed to sleep out, okay? And he was very upset about this, as you can imagine. He's 18 years old, getting ready to go to college. Now, backstory, look, he got into like a little bit of trouble in high school, like nothing major. He got caught drinking at a football game, and he got caught playing like Ding Dong Ditch. Right? He was ringing doorbells and running away, right? Like, but like, that's it, dude. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, very typical adolescent behavior, right? So I bring I bring mom in actually. And I was like, so mom, what's the deal? Why can't he sleep out? What's going on here? Because like in 2 months, he's going to have total freedom, right? He could sleep wherever he wants. If he decides to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go to New York City and sleep on a park bench, he can do that. Like, is anything going to happen between now and then that is going to make him better well equipped to deal with that freedom? Well, no. Mom, couldn't you also say that by not allowing him to sleep out now, you're not giving him an opportunity to practice dealing with that independence before he has this total freedom at college? She's like, well, and she was a great, she's a good mom, right? She's like, yeah, I guess so. So mom, what's going on? Well, when he sleeps out, I can't sleep at night. I worry, and I'm up all night. So perfect example of like mom's own anxiety was getting in the way of what was actually rational and reasonable for her 18-year-old son to be doing, and so, I do think a lot of times parents' own emotions, like I use that example all the time. You're traveling on a plane, and the oxygen mask drops down, put your mask on first before you help your child, because if you can't breathe, you can't help anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a similar, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
I think a similar, like, I was talking about the two different extremes. I think the same issue is underlying that other end of the extreme, and it's just presenting in a different way. So a lot of times when parents are like dismissive and invalidating, that's also meeting the same need of, I can't, I can't worry about this kid and what they're worrying about. It's too much.
I don't understand
Or
why
I don't
they're having
understand
that
it.
emotion.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the parent was never validated.
Right. So that just kind of carries on, and kids in an environment like that they'll learn one of two extremes where it's, oh, my needs and my emotions are important, so I'm going to amplify them, and now I'm going to be really expressive and explosive with my emotions so that they actually hear me and take it seriously.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to learn that, oh, my feelings and emotions don't matter, so I'm going to swallow them, and I'm going to never feel them and never address them. That's a huge trigger for self-harm, what you were talking about earlier, where it's like, I don't have another way to express this and way to feel this, and I'm not allowed to feel this. So that's another like thing that can really contribute to self-harm. So both of those extremes are, equally as dangerous.
Or Carly, like when you have, or what about I, the child, teenager, whoever, goes to mom and dad, and mom or dad becomes very emotional.
Yeah.
Right? So I try to express how I'm feeling to my parent, and they become so emotional that now, wait a second, I can't put that on them. Right? I'm not going to communicate this to them because, mom or dad they can't handle it right now. They got too much on their own plate.
Yeah. And a lot of parents are like, okay, so, right, I'm either doing that, I'm making my kid responsible for managing my emotions, or they're like, I really don't want to do that, so I'm never going to show my emotions to my kid. There is that healthy middle ground where it's like, you're allowed to say to your kid, you're upsetting me or you're worrying me or whatever, right? But you also have to clarify that that's your own emotion to manage. That's a conversation that comes up so often with my clients. Like, you are not responsible for managing your parents' worry. Your parents are going to worry about you till the day they die, probably, right? Like, it's not your job to make sure that they're not worried. Obviously it impacts you when they worry, right? But that's their emotion to manage. So both the parent and the kid needs to understand that, and that can get a little muddy sometimes for sure.
I think too, just piggybacking off of that, something, and I never want to come at this from like a judgmental way, right? Yeah. Parents are like, they generally don't have bad intentions.
Right. Yeah.
I think what can contribute to anxiety is when parents are unpredictable. So sometimes I'm coming at you from a really loving, accepting, maybe even permissive way. And then next week I'm coming at you hard, and these are the consequences, and I'm not dealing with you. Yeah. So that can be really anxiety provoking, because now I don't know how my parent or my primary attachment figure is going to respond to me. And so
it's like the child of an alcoholic.
Right.
What drunk dad's showing up today?
Yep.
Is his happy drunk dad, or like that drunk dad that's going to beat my ass for just because?
Right. So that's one part. And then the other thing I think Sam and I really talk about a lot when we bounce ideas off of each other is accommodation, especially with littles. So when you are accommodating your child's anxiety, you are not benefiting them.
Yeah.
And back to what Carly said, you don't want to watch your child suffer. I'm a mom now, right? I can imagine. You want to swoop in and save your baby, right?
Yeah.
But if you take them off the bike before they learn to ride it, they're never going to learn to ride it, right? And it's also like, yeah, you know what? You might fall off this bike. You might get a scratch. You have a helmet. You have knee pads. Those are your protective factors.
You're not going to die.
You're not going to die. Right. If you get a scratch, we're going to go inside and get some peroxide, and we're going to put a Band-Aid on it, and we're going to try again, right? So really not, what did you say earlier? What was your example? The hole?
Oh, you have to jump in the hole with the child. So actually, like, imagine literally your child being in a hole, you jumping in the hole with the child, and being able to, like, talk through and, like, validate the emotion they're feeling, understand why they might have that anxiety, and then from there, like, you can kind of problem solve together. Like, okay, how can we
get out of this hole?
Yeah, like, how do we get out of this hole? Literally.
Yeah.
And the other piece to that, just like bouncing off of the accommodating of anxiety, it's also like parents internalizing their children's anxiety in the way of like, oh my God, they're having anxiety. Well, now what? And then how they respond to their child's anxiety is oftentimes with anxiety, which then just further creates like a gas fire of anxiety. And then it also models to your child that, oh, I should be scared of my anxiety. When in reality, anxiety is a very normal human emotion for you to have.
It's a defense mechanism.
It is. And that's
keep you alive.
Exactly. It's a protective emotion for you. Yes. At times, can it absolutely hinder you? Absolutely. But there's also the other piece of it where, like, you're going to have anxiety. That's why sometimes I'll have clients come in, oh, I have a presentation tomorrow. I'm super anxious about this. It's like, yeah, as you should be. You should be anxious about that. That's a normal emotion for you to have.
Yeah. I think also, too, something that can be helpful is instead of saying, I'm so anxious about this, like, I'm a little uncomfortable to give this presentation, right? Because like you said earlier, you believe what you tell yourself, right? So I'm anxious and I can't do this. You're probably not going to do well on that presentation. But if you come at it like, okay, I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm a little nervous about people judging me.
How it's going to go.
Let's see how it goes. I can always do better next time.
I feel that way. Yeah, I feel that way about like throwing trauma around, right? Like, like that word now is like, it's out there a lot. And like if, my concern is like, I understand it's relative, right? And at the same time, if you're describing things as trauma, you're going to feel differently about it if, because of the verbiage that you're using. Right. In my sessions, I see, just to kind of make it a giant kind of umbrella, two extremes. And we always talk about extremes. Like, extremes are not usually good, right? We want to try to live in that gray area in the middle between black and white. But I get on one end the super helicopter parent, right? On top of every single thing that their kid does, with the real-time grading and parents having access to grades and, like, growing up, like, I had like a handwritten grade book. Like, at the end of the marking period, I would walk up to the teacher's desk and I would like look at my grades and kind of get a gauge of like, okay, how did I do? It looks like it might be an A, it might be a B, maybe a C or D sometimes, right? Like, but then I was surprised when my report card came out. That was the one day I had to stress about. But now with real-time grading, like, the grade goes in, you see how your overall GPA is impacted, parents are getting notified, parents have problems checking 5, 6, 7 times a day on the grades. They're texting their kid at school, how did you miss assignment? Like, a lot of times it's not up to date. And so I get these super helicopter parents on top of everything their kid does. Drives a lot of anxiety. And I talked about it in the first podcast. Like, those are your AP honors kids that are just miserable, man. They're getting it done, but out of straight fear of like what's going to happen with their parents, I have kids whose parents assign them their own extra math homework on the weekend and then get upset that their kid is resistant to doing the extra work, like on top of the AP honors work. So I get these helicopter parents on one end that just talking about it is giving me anxiety, right? On the other end of that spectrum, you get like the super like loosey-goosey, like, I'm more of your friend than a parent, right? And the thing is, it's like that kid has a lot of anxiety too. because he doesn't have the consistency of looking to like a caregiver to take care of them, and that can drive anxiety as well. And sure, the helicopter parent kid looks at this one and is like, oh man, that life looks so much better.
Yeah.
But in reality, like that kid a lot of times can have anxiety as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's that gray area of, again, of being loving, validating, compassionate, while at the same time having consistent limits and boundaries that are reasonable with your children. And as they get older, I said it before, letting that leash out a little bit more, by their senior year of high school. My belief is like there really shouldn't be all that much in the way of like rules and restrictions on them, right? You can have your rules for the house, but that kid is about to be completely independent. And I have clients who like go to college and still while they're in college are like come home and their parents treat them like they're still in high school. I have kids who's out of college, graduated, back living at home, and they still have their parents on top of all their stuff that they're doing. And that is 100%, and I'll say this to the camera, 100% the parent shit in that kind of situation. If you're still managing your kid in that way when they're 22, 23, 24 years old, that's your stuff.
Yeah. I think that goes back to what you were saying too, Taylor, about the predictability of a parent really matters. And sometimes the lack of boundaries creates unpredictability, and that can cause a lot of anxiety. Like, all right, if I go to a party and drink, like, what is the consequence? Like, what is my parent going to say? Like, I don't know if they're going to care, or if they're going to be pissed, or, so yeah, that can either cause a kid to live in their bubble. I'm not even going to try and find out, or I would say most kids are testing, they're testing the waters. What is going to happen? If I let my own leash out a little bit, and that can cause anxiety too, for sure.
Yeah. I always say to parents, there needs to be like an even balance of being validating and sturdy. Like the word sturdy, I feel like is like very, like you can visualize it, like someone literally being 2 feet on the ground flat, standing up straight, and you can be that way and also be able to be validating to your child's like emotions and be able to connect with them on whatever their experience might be in that moment. And so oftentimes, like you mentioned, there needs to be consistency, and especially with younger kids, there needs to be consistency. So there will oftentimes be parents that will have their own anxiety about putting in place boundaries because it might seem a little unfair, or I have anxiety about them having a tantrum. And oftentimes, and this is something that me and Taylor again talk about a lot, is being able to like validate the parent's emotions in that moment, and also being able to like tell the parent like it's okay if your kid's pissed off at you. Like that's totally fine. It's okay for them to feel anxious. It's okay for them to have those emotions. Taylor always likes to say that like if the kid's mad, let them throw whatever it might be. Let them trash their room.
Because that's their, one, it feels good in the moment. That's why they're trashing the room. But two, it's their consequence. They're going to have to clean their room up. The key is you're being a terror right now, and I still love you. You are not your behavior. No matter what, we're going to work through this, and I still love you. That's how you reach a place of security. So if you're looking at it from an attachment-based type of therapy, which is how I approach therapy, that's where you're reaching that security.
I think a lot of parents are scared that rewards the behavior, right?
Yeah, dude, I wouldn't. I'm straight up like I wouldn't. Like I'm not on board with that. Like I'm not letting my fucking kid trash their room. Like that's not happening.
Within reason,
like
maybe,
that is not happening.
Listen, I'm not saying they can break the windows, but if they want to take their bedding off and throw it around,
fair. But I think that should come with some consequences after.
Well, that's the point.
I think it should come with explanation, right? I think that's where psychoeducation is important, right? It's that behavior is not going to be acceptable forever, but the first time they do it, you have to understand they're doing it because they don't know how else to get this anger out of them. So that's why they come to us, right? Is to find other ways to do it.
And I think making them clean it up, right? Like that's going to be a really important part because behaviors have consequences, right? And it's home is a safe place to learn that behaviors have consequences, which is what you're saying, right? Like your behavior was not great and it had some not great consequences, and I still love you. Right. Let's deal with these consequences. You have to deal with it, and maybe we can work together to find a better way to deal with it next time, because they're going to learn that one way or another. They're going to learn that out in the world, at school, whatever. They're going to learn that one way or another. And so to get to have a safe space at home to learn that can be really huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, within reason, obviously. It's
Within
like, we
reason.
also have to be like, if you can't handle this emotion safely, like,
Right.
we have to do something
Yes.
else. But yeah, we're talking a lot about what parents like should and shouldn't do. And like parents might feel like a lot of like, not judged or just like, oh my God, like, how do I
Yeah.
get it right?
I could
And
do it.
like, you know, you're going to mess up and it's like, okay to mess up, and
Right.
maybe even explaining to your kid to mess up. You know what I mean?
Rupture, repair. When you rupture, you repair.
Okay.
That's a huge part. Yeah.
All right. So, all right. So kind of getting to the end of like some stuff we're talking about parents, and I get how it could kind of come across like we're like, this is what you got to do and this is where you're screwing up, and like just want to make it clear that it's not easy. We understand that. Like we're sitting here in a nice comfy, office on a nice comfortable couch being like, this is what you got to do with your kids, and you got to put the boundaries in place, and you have to be loving and compassionate, and you have to come from this middle place. I could say that I truly believe that is the right way to do it, right? I feel strongly about that. And at the same time, I'm not telling you that like I would get it right all the time. Like it's hard, right? When our own emotions are playing a role, and it's our children, the people that we love the most, it is extremely, extremely difficult to do. So the last thing I want is to be coming across like we're being judgmental in any kind of way, but at the same time, just kind of telling you how it is, while also recognizing that it's super, super hard to do when you really love your kids, especially.
Especially if you're like unlearning your own stuff, right? If you are kind of one of those parents who is like, I don't want to do things the way that my parents did things, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of unlearning. And I think even just showing that to your kids, saying, you know what, mom's not always going to get it right either. Dad's not always going to get it right either. That's okay. Sometimes that's actually like really positive modeling, you know, to just admit, you know what, I don't love the way I handled that. I'm going to work on that. You know, that's huge for kids to see.
I love that. You know, like I think that's something I'm encouraging parents to do a lot, is like to kind of humanize yourself.
Yeah.
You know, just as like as a clinician, I don't try to come from this all-knowing perspective. Like it's same for parents, you know, like I think it really hits home for kids when parents let them in a little bit about how they're feeling, or what, childhood or was like for them, and struggles that they had. Like it goes a really, really long way, for sure. But on that note, though, but we're coming close to the end of the podcast. We did have a question submitted in our Ask a Therapist. What do you want to call that thing? I keep saying jar. Thank you, jar. I was calling it a bucket. It's not a bucket. We don't have a bucket.
Big jar.
So this question, written down here, fairly simple question, but also complicated at the same time here. Okay, and the question reads: how do you grow and learn from your past?
It's a big one.
It is a big one.
I'd be happy to go first on this one, because it's something, man, that it's something I'm really proud of. When I was a younger person in my 20s, and I'm 45 years old now. I know I don't look it, but it's all right.
It's all right.
Yeah. And modest. When I was a younger guy in my 20s, let's just say that I was not making the positive contributions to society that I am now, right? And it led me down some really dark places. And when I started to get my life together at the age of like 30, and I started making positive moves, and I went back to grad school at 30 and started working in the field, and I would like put on my little button-down shirt and my khakis, and I wanted to feel very professional and everything. Like I was very secretive about my past, right? I was terrified that people would find out like where I came from, because I was around all these like professional people all of a sudden, And for a really long time, I was really embarrassed, and I think I still identified as the person that I was in my 20s. But fast forward to today, at 45 years old, like I'm fucking proud of what it was that I went through as a younger person, because the truth is like I love my life right now. Like doing this and with these guys here, and doing it with my wife, and bringing my dog to work with me every day, and I got this beautiful daughter at home now. Like I love my life, and I literally wouldn't trade it with anybody's. But the truth is that this wouldn't be my life if I didn't go through what I went through, right? My life might still be fine. Maybe I'm an accountant or some shit like that, you know, but like it wouldn't be this life. And I read this really awesome book. It's called Many Lives, Many Masters. Okay. And I would highly recommend it. And it's about this psychiatrist. It's based on a true story. Psychiatrists work with this one patient called Catherine. And Catherine comes to him with all these kind of crazy phobias, right? And this is like in late 1960s, 1970s, maybe. I might be getting that wrong. And she has all these crazy phobias. And so he tries traditional talk therapy with her, and she's not making progress. So he decides he's going to hypnotize her, right? And he wants to put her under hypnosis, because sometimes under hypnosis, clients will remember things from childhood that maybe they blocked out, like childhood trauma. So he wanted to see, are some childhood traumas there that are leading to these phobias she has now? But when he goes to do this age regression with her under hypnosis, she starts reporting a life that she lived in the year 440 BC. Okay? And she knows things about this life in the time 440 BC that she shouldn't know. She was like a 1960s kind of like housewife, not super educated or anything like that. There's no reason she would know these details about that. And they go on to do this work together, and she reports all of these different past lives that she lived. And then he starts to find these correlations between how she died in these past lives and the phobias that she has now. So in one life, she drowns in a flood with her baby, so fear of water. In another life, she reported that she had this disease and all of the people in her village were locked into this cave and it was closed up in order to not have it. So fear of like closed dark spaces, right? But listen, I'm getting there. When he would bring patients then, because he did this with multiple patients, to the point after they passed and before they started their next life, they all reported the same thing. They reported that they would cross over to another realm and they'd be greeted by a warm, welcoming energy. He said they would then look back at their past life that they just lived, like millisecond by millisecond, but they looked at that life with a moral compass that they never had before, right? They would feel all the wrong that they did to people and where they could have done better things. And then what he said is that we then sketch out our own next life, and we purposely put trauma and obstacles and pain into that life as a way of righting the wrongs of our soul from the previous life, right? And the goal is to ultimately get to a place of like next to godliness, right? So look, can't prove that. Believe it or not, the point that I'm getting to is this idea of what DBT calls finding meaning in the pain, right? And when you're in the pain, being able to ask yourself, like, why did God or the universe or whatever put this pain, or maybe me, put this pain in my life for? What is it here to teach me? What trajectory is it meant to send me down? And when you're in it, I can tell you this, while you're in that pain, it's hard, man. It's hard to really find that. But I tell you, like once you get out of it and you're able to look back and you'll see, wow, that had to happen in order to bring my life to where it is right now. So it's this balance of what, again, DBT would call the middle path, the balance of acceptance and change. Being able to say, like, look, I've been through some tough shit. I made some mistakes in that moment in time. That was the best that I could do, right? And I can't change that, and I can't go back and right those wrongs. And at the same time, what kind of changes can I make in my life moving forward in order to not go through something like that again?
Yeah.
And that's just my 2 cents on
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with what you're saying, because if I didn't lose my dad when I was 13, I would not be the grief therapist that I am today.
Yeah.
It gives me such a different window to look through that other people might not be able to.
Yeah.
And I also think, like, when it comes to forgiving yourself for past mistakes or moving on, I think there needs to be a balance of compassion for yourself, and this is what I was doing at this time, and acceptance and accountability of, okay, this is the mistake I made. Here's how I'm not going to make it again. Here's my responsibility in this situation and what I could do differently.
Yeah, I agree. I think self-compassion is the key, right? And a lot of people confuse self-compassion with making excuses for themselves, right? Oh, well, I did that because I was grieving. Oh, well, I did that because I didn't know any better. Yeah, right? Like that's true, right? But it doesn't mean we stay stuck there. It doesn't mean we succumb to the things that brought us pain. It still requires taking some responsibility. And that's a huge thing that I talk about in my sessions too. Like both can be true. You can have compassion for yourself and hold yourself accountable. In fact, that's really, really important to be able to do, because you could take accountability and pile on the shame and blame and guilt, and that doesn't really help you get anywhere. Shame is not a motivator for positive behavior. If it was, we'd be out of a job. You know what I mean? Like shame is like
It's
so
nasty
like
emotion, man.
it's super powerful, but it doesn't motivate positive change. So that self-compassion is what's going to motivate positive change, right? I didn't know any better, or I was doing this because of this. I love myself enough to work on that, because I deserve to be free from that kind of mindset. Still holds accountability, but, is a little bit more positive change. And I feel like I have a different interpretation of the middle path thing, because I have a lot of clients who are not everything happens for a reason people. They're like, there's no reason I should have gone through that. That was horrible. That trauma that I experienced, like, I don't see the upside in that. Like, there's no positive that it brings. And I'm like, yeah, like sometimes shitty things just happen, and there's really who am I to say I know why? You know what I mean? Like, so sometimes I don't know, it just depends on the situation, but sometimes for certain clients, walking the middle path means accepting that, right? Accepting, I don't know why these things happened.
Sure.
I don't think that there was a good reason for them to happen. I don't think I should have had to go through that, but I did, but they did happen, and I did make that mistake, or that did happen to me. What am I going to do with that? And so similar thing, right? It's still gaining control over what you're going to do with that pain. But some people aren't really, everything happens for a reason people. I personally find comfort in that sometimes. And sometimes I'm leaning more that way, where it's like, no, shitty things just happen,
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel like you get to choose if
Yeah.
you're going to make the meaning, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, I didn't deserve for my dad to die.
Right.
Also, like, I chose to let it benefit me in my career.
I chose what to do with
I
that.
chose what to do with it.
Yeah.
That's actually the idea of happenstance, which is a career counselor created that. His name is Kohlberg. And it's the idea of that, like, you go through these different experiences within your lifetime, and then there's the possibility of it, like, giving you some type of path towards a career in some way, which I truly believe in too, right?
Yeah.
Like, in my childhood, my mom had cancer when I was 13. Apparently that's the age that things happen.
13.
And like, I went to therapy for the first time when I was 13. And that made me want to be someone that would help a child go through a hard time. So again, the idea of like happenstance, even though, like Carly said, not everyone loves that idea.
Right. Doesn't mean like, oh, my mom was supposed to get cancer and that's a good thing that happened.
Right.
It's like, no, that was shitty.
It did.
It did happen though, and I'm going to choose how I respond to that experience.
Right. Not my fault that it happened,
Yeah.
and 100% my problem to
Yeah.
deal with. So, on that note, guys, I think we're coming to the end of our third episode of the Blueprint podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please, 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 please hit the little subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. I'm not even going to say it. It'll pop up on the screen. You'll see it. And again, really grateful for you guys for turning out tonight. And make sure you tune in. We're going to be checking in every 2 weeks. So every other Monday at 10 a.m. we'll be going live with a new episode. Thanks, guys.